With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. When you give the fan favorite everywhere belt bag, the real gift is... And when the ultra-soothing Rest Feel slides are the gift, you're really giving them... This holiday, Lululemon makes it easy to give little luxuries that go beyond. Open the moment. Shop now at Lululemon.com.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello, America. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the United States of America. The phone number, if you want to be on the program, 877-973-7425. I know I'm repetitious on this, but it would actually really mean a lot to me if you text the word Army to 33777. And follow that link. You'll get a link. You'll go to a website and you can put in your first name, your last name, your email, and zip code. We're going to start right after the election, really the day after the election. I'm going to head to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then we'll do that Thursday. We're going to do an event in Tulsa, post-election briefing, and then next year we're going to spread this around the country. And so I'd love to be able to email listeners and say, hey, I'm going to be in your area. Come hang out. Grab a beer, come to an event, whatever, and let everybody know. So if you text Army to 33777, get in the database. The other thing we want to do is that those of you nationally, here in Georgia, everyone's very familiar with it, but nationally, so we've got an action center. And as Congress comes back, we want to be able to send you an alert and say, hey, they're doing this thing. Call them and tell them not to, or call them and tell them to vote for it. And we have an action center, and you can click a button on your cell phone, and it'll call your member of Congress, not mine, your member of Congress, based on your zip code. And you can call and say, hey, don't do this thing or vote for this thing. Makes you highly effective. So instead of just listening to me complain about stuff, we give you a solution that you can be a part of fixing the country. And that's very much something that I believe in, is giving you a call to action and letting you be a part of the process. Part of that process is going to come to this story. The U.S. Treasury Department is now reporting that our debt service payments are now over $1 trillion a year. We are very rapidly getting to the point that our national debt service payments, just the interest on the debt that we got to pay, exceeds the amount of money that we pay for our military. And historically, when countries get to that point, they begin to decline. There is a way to fix it. But first, we need to acknowledge this is a bipartisan problem. Republicans only care about the debt and deficit when Democrats are in charge. Historically, the best spending deals, and it pains me to say this, but the best spending deals have been when a Democrat's been in the White House and a Republican Congress has been on the other side. Bill Clinton and the Republicans in Congress in the 1990s actually balanced the federal budget. It's the last time they did a budget that balanced. Taxes went up a little bit, frankly, but the budget balanced. And we were not adding to the national debt. When Barack Obama was president, it was the conservatives in the House of Representatives that forced everyone, including their own party leadership, to go along with the what was it? Oh, now it escapes me. But they had a plan Sequestration, that's what it's called, sequestration. So the Republicans had a plan where the Democrats had to agree with the Republicans to actually cut the size and scope of the federal government. All right, y'all, I got a package being delivered from FedEx, and I'm the only person here, so I got to sign it live on the radio. You guys get to witness this. Thank you very much, by the way, for coming. Not a problem. Thanks. I'm the only person in the office expecting a package today, and here I am live on the radio having to sign the FedEx package because I couldn't wave the signature on it. So, nonetheless, quick and easy. FedEx is awesome. So Republicans and Democrats, when Barack Obama was president and Republicans were in Congress, agreed on sequestration. Contrary to what you might have been told, sequestration was not a reduction in the growth of future spending. You know, that's what typically happens in Washington, is they agree to cuts, but they're cuts to future growth in spending. Sequestration was actually real-time cuts to existing growth in government. So actually the size and scope of the federal government went down. The problem some people had is that it cut defense. Sequestration, Republicans and Democrats could not agree on where to cut or how to cut, so the agreement was to cut everything. But it worked. We're going to have to go to something like that because here's the problem. Our national debt is growing so large that at some point taxes on everybody, including the middle class, have to go up because you won't be able to cut government enough. We are still within a window where you can begin to cut government in order to solve the problem. So how does this work? Well, you remember a fraction. Remember a fraction. Fraction has a numerator and a denominator. A numerator and a denominator. So our national debt as a fraction of gross domestic product. The debt is now beginning to exceed our gross domestic product. So you put the debt on top and the GDP on the bottom. The GDP is the denominator. The debt is the numerator. Now, what some people think we should do is we should reduce the numerator by throwing a lot of money at the national debt and shrinking it. No, sirree, Bob. What you do is you grow the denominator, the gross domestic product. You expand the size of the economy, and then suddenly the debt as a percentage of the economy does not exceed the economy. Now, let me put this in more practical terms to you. We talk about pies in this country, growing the pie economically. Let's talk about the fixed size pie. The fixed size pie is the total economy between the government and the private sector. If you want to grow the denominator, grow the gross domestic product in this country, expand the economy so that the debt as a percentage of the economy is less than 100%. You got to grow the denominator. You got to grow the underlying economy. In order to grow an economy economically, liberal and conservative economists would all agree you have to shrink the size of the government. As the government shrinks, the share of the private sector grows. As the private sector grows, remember, a private sector is always more efficient in spending than a public sector. Why? Because a public sector is command and control. We have a federal government where Congress says you're going to spend this much on this. In a private sector, it's arm's length transactions that can be renegotiated as things change dynamically, so money is spent more efficiently. So as the private sector grows, the economy grows. And as the economy grows, the debt to GDP ratio begins to shrink. And as the economy grows, it produces more tax revenue. And as the economy produces more tax revenue, that tax revenue can then be fed into a federal budget to then reduce the deficit every year. Now, let me explain the deficit and debt for those of you who don't know the difference. Every year, Congress runs a deficit. Our expenditures exceed our income. At the end of the year, if the deficit still exceeds income, if we still have a deficit, that deficit then rolls over into the national debt. And our national debt is the total annual deficit compiled over time. You want to shrink and get rid of the deficit, you have to reduce the size of the government and increase tax revenue. You grow the economy without raising taxes. You've grown the economy. You've increased money to the federal government. Why? Because there are more people making more money. So even if taxes haven't changed, more people making more money, their percentage of income goes up, their amount of money they pay in taxes goes up. The other thing you do, you begin to shrink the size of government, start cutting government. You can cut government programs. You can cut salaries of people in government. Not a lot of money there, but you can do it. You begin to whittle down the size and scope of the federal government, get it back to its core functions, which you're going to have to do. You've reduced the cost of government. You've expanded the private sector. The expanded private sector begins to produce economic growth. Between the reduction in the size and scope of the federal government and the increase in the private sector and the efficiencies of the private sector, it increases tax revenue to the government. You begin to pay down the national debt. And what have you done? You haven't raised taxes. You've just shrunk the government. And you've stimulated the economy. This is a hard truth for people to understand, particularly on the left. When you grow the government, you shrink the private sector. The private sector spends money more efficiently than the public sector. As the public sector grows and becomes more burdensome, it's harder for the private sector to innovate. In particular, it's harder for small businesses. Big businesses and wealthy people use the complexity of a big government as an advantage against small businesses and the middle class. But here's the dirty little secret. Democrats don't actually like the middle class. Democrats like the billionaires because the billionaires are almost all of them donors to the Democratic Party. But Democrats in their socialist-oriented thinking, their communist-oriented thinking, the bourgeois are bad. And the bourgeois, who are the bourgeois? The bourgeois are not the billionaires. The bourgeois are the middle class. They're the farmers who own the land. They're the shopkeeper who owns the means of production in the economy. They're the bad guys because they're the ones who are presumed to hoard the capital. The billionaires and the poor are who the Democrats like. The poor because they'll vote for them for their social welfare spending. The billionaires love the Democrats because they keep government complex as a subsidy to the billionaires. So you got to fight the Democrats in order to cut government. When you cut government, it simplifies government. And when government gets simple, the middle class resources are freed up to compete in the private sector against the billionaires because the middle class no longer has to hire lawyers and lobbyists to compete to navigate an overly complex system. The efficiencies of the money begin to be spent in the private sector, which grows the private sector, which grows the economy, which generates more tax revenue, which pays down the national debt, which gets the national debt service payment less than $1 trillion a year. This is not hard. This is not rocket science. I went to law school to avoid math, and yet even I know this. Everyone knows this. But what you have to have is politicians with a will to cut the government. Now, this is a problem for Republicans right now because Republicans have become big government too. The Republicans becoming big government Republicans want to grow government to award their friends and punish their enemies in the same way Democrats do. The solution for Republicans is actually to take the ring of power and throw it in the volcano and melt it. Destroy the government as it is. Scale back the powers of Washington. Reduce the size and scope of the government. Here's the problem for the GOP. Every time Democrats get elected, they are willing to lose their election to grow the government. Look at Obamacare. They all went down in flames in 2010. Republicans had the biggest sweep since the 1800s. But the Democrats locked in Obamacare, played it for keeps. Republicans need to do the same in reverse. Get rid of the government and play for keeps that way. You get rid of the government, you get rid of their power, you reduce the government, you expand the economy, you get rewarded by the voters for growing the gross domestic product of the private sector, and they return you to office because you've made government make sense again and you've made the middle class competitive. Republicans just lack the will to do it because once they get power, they're scared to death of losing it. And because of that, they lose it every time.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry. Everybody's talking about it. Billions of dollars invested, so buckle up. The problem is AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, Databricks, Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/Erickson, ERICKSON. That's oracle.com/Erickson. Oracle.com/Erickson. Go check them out today. Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here. The phone number 877-973-7425. Paul's been waiting patiently. Paul, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Eric?
Great. What's going on?
Well, I watched the debate, and I've heard Kamala say this I don't know how many times, but Trump left us a mess. Trump left us a mess. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the mess was actually created by the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Because Trump tried to keep flights from China coming to the United States during the beginning of COVID. And I'm assuming the mess she's talking about is COVID.
Yeah.
But when Trump tried to do that, he was called a xenophobe and a racist.
And you will recall from the debate that she attacked Xi Jinping for a cover-up from that virus coming from China, and yet she voted for a resolution in the Senate condemning Donald Trump for calling it a China virus.
Exactly.
Yep.
So the mess they tried to clean up was her mess, Chuck Schumer's mess, Nancy Pelosi's mess.
Yeah.
Because I saw all of them on TV. He's a racist. He's a xenophobe. He can't keep the Chinese people from coming here.
Right.
And it wasn't a permanent thing. It was a temporary thing until this virus went away, which it never will.
Yeah, and look, the reality here is Paul, first, thanks for being patient, but also, Donald Trump's been president for 4 years of the last 16 years. Joe Biden and Barack Obama have been president for 12 of the last 16 years. And they would have you believe that Donald Trump is to blame for everything. Really? It doesn't add up. The math simply does not add up on that. For him to be president for 4 of these 16 years and all the problems are his, really? Voters don't feel that way, by the way. And this, again, it is possible to hold two thoughts in your head at one time, that he didn't have a good debate performance, but the undecided voters don't care because she answered questions terribly. You know, the questions allegedly given to her in advance. So, by the way, I do want to explain that one to you because there is a rumor now out there online that a whistleblower has come forward saying Kamala Harris was given the answers in advance. Here's the actual situation. An anonymous account on Twitter says they have a whistleblower who's signing a notarized affidavit that Kamala Harris was given the questions in advance. It's an anonymous account. It won't identify the whistleblower. It won't identify the affidavit. It says coming soon. That's whipped everyone into a frenzy saying, aha, see. We don't know who this account is. They have provided no evidence. But people want to believe, and I can't understand why, because the questions were so obvious and the answers were so stupid. It just boggles the mind. Now, I got to tell you about Hillsdale College, where actually they elevate truth and education, not indoctrination. All you have to do is go to ericforhillsdale.com, ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com. Hillsdale College is a brilliant educational institution in this country. You can get so much of their stuff for free, including their podcasts, a great podcast network led by Dr. Larry Arnn, available in your podcast app. You can get Imprimis completely for free, delivered to your mailbox. You can get their courses and lectures, a lot of it for free, all at ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K. Hillsdale College believes in classical education. They believe in thought and education, not indoctrination. They believe in the truth. And they would love to share it with you at ericforhillsdale.com, E-R-I-C-K, ericforhillsdale.com. Go sign up, get the podcast, get the lecture series, get Imprimis, get it all for free at ericforhillsdale.com today.
Blinds.com Cyber Monday Last Chance is happening now. Don't miss out on up to 45% off site-wide. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 45% site-wide, plus a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hello there, welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I am 1,000% happy to have you if you can make it by the call screener. In fact, I want to go to a phone call right now to Mike. Welcome to the show. How are you? Mike?
Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yes, sir. Okay, and this might go into a little bit of, that conspiracy type stuff, but something I haven't heard anybody talk about with the disastrous withdrawal of Afghanistan and Kamala being the last one in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And my thing is Joe Biden ever running the country? And think about it, he was the last one in the room when Hillary and Obama had their Benghazi thing that was just as disaster.
Yeah, look,
leave it up to that.
It was absolutely, listen, Joe Biden has been in the room for a lot of things. He was in the room with Benghazi. Joe Biden was in the room objecting to going after Osama bin Laden. Joe Biden was in the room with Kamala Harris when bailing out of Afghanistan. I think that Joe Biden, by the way, it was Bob Gates, Barack Obama's defense secretary, who said Joe Biden's been wrong about every major decision on foreign policy in the last 50 years. And I think that's the case. He has been wrong about so much, and that's why I'm worried about what's happening right now. The phone number is 877-973-7425. I want to pivot off the phone call there and Joe Biden being wrong about so much, because Joe Biden and Keir Starmer, who is the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who's in Washington right now, they're on the verge of probably starting World War III if they're not careful. I want to step back and paint a broader picture for you that you need to understand. The Norwegians are sounding the alarm. In northern Norway, there have been a series of incidents where supposed tourists have been showing up near military and intelligence installations and surveying them, cutting cables, doing all sorts of things that are questionable. Now, you should know that Norway shares a border with Russia. Above Finland, Norway wraps around above Finland. And up there near Murmansk in Russia, they share a border. There are NATO surveillance facilities. Cables have been cut. Soldiers have been targeted. There are lots of Russian tourists in the area. And the Norwegians are deeply concerned. But not only that, the Americans, the British, the French, and the Germans are sounding the alarm that Russian submarines are apparently hovering around undersea cables. So, if you don't know, for a lot of reasons related to physics and the speed of light, it's actually easier to route electronic communication through undersea cable than it is via satellite. It's faster. Now, why? Let's say you're going up 1,000 miles, you come back down 1,000 miles. In the process, you've got to route through a satellite. You got to route through two different systems on Earth. You got to go up, you got to go down. A undersea cable actually, one, takes the satellite out. Two, is oftentimes a shorter distance. And three, it processes faster because there's less of a buffer. Now, why is that? Well, part of the problem with a satellite is in addition to its height in the atmosphere. And by the way, I always get people who claim to know more than me, who oftentimes don't, lecturing me in what I'm saying. For those of you who want to bang away at your keyboard to try to correct me, your email is going to go in the trash and you're going to get blocked for this reason. I know I'm not an expert, but I also know how to talk to the experts. And I'm trying to do some basic explanation to people who don't need your in-depth 5,000-word explanation, to try to explain to people something to simplify to them. So spare me your email and your know-it-allness. I understand you know more than me and you want me to know more than you. All I'm trying to do is explain the basics to people to make a larger point. So spare me your email, please. Thank you. Now, for those of you who aren't the experts and you just want to know the basic understanding of what the problem is, we have a lot of undersea cables around the world. We started with undersea cables before we were putting satellites in space with data. Also, a lot of the satellites we use in data, they're not in low Earth orbit. They're higher in orbit than, for example, Elon Musk's Starlink. So in many cases, our transmission up there and back is a further distance than just going from New York to London on the cable. In addition, because of the buffering, because you got to point the satellite dish at the satellite, it needs to be somewhat precise, as you know if you have DirecTV, and then back down, it can be problematic. So we spend a lot of our time transmitting through undersea cable. There are connection points around the world in coastal cities, and the Russians have submarines around major wire transfer points looking like they're going to cut the undersea cables to sever international communication, and in particular, to sever communication between the United States and Europe quickly. If you sever the undersea cable between the United States and Europe, how do you have to get the messages there? Well, it's got to go around the world the other direction. It's got to go from New York to Los Angeles, Los Angeles to Honolulu, Honolulu to Shanghai, Beijing, Tokyo, Seoul, somewhere like that, across where? This big mass of land called Russia, where there are cables that they can tap into and snoop if the traffic all has to go the other direction. Or you send it by satellite, and the Russians have mastered shining lasers at the satellites to disrupt their ability to get information. That's why the undersea cables are so important. They transmit faster with less buffer and are more reliable than the satellite communication. So if you cut it off, all our information has to either go around the world the opposite direction via Russia or has to go via satellite, which can be disrupted. So now here's this. This is the whole point of all of that. The Americans and the Russians obviously not getting along. Same with the rest of NATO. We maintain we are not at war with Russia. The Russians increasingly believe we are at war with them, like it or not. So now the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the President of the United States are meeting in Washington to decide whether or not Ukraine should be allowed to use long-range missiles into Russia. The Russians are saying this is an act of war. The Russians, like the Chinese, are already at war with us. The Chinese, you should know, they're at war with us. The Chinese are at war. Now, we're used to thinking about war in terms of bullets and bombs. The Chinese and the Russians are engaged in digital warfare against us. Take, for example, the federal indictment last week of the people who work for Russia Today, the TV network. They were paying Americans to produce video content to go viral on the internet that advanced messages the Russians thought would be helpful. Now, why? They weren't just trying to advance the Russian message. What they were also trying to do was they were trying to get division in this country. The Russian strategy, contrary to what the Democrats want you to believe, the Russian strategy has never been to advance the election of Donald Trump. In fact, if you read the Mueller report, what the Mueller report has said, and what our national intelligence agencies continue to say, is the Russians do not have a vested interest in getting Donald Trump elected. That's a Democratic talking point, but it's not true. What the Russians have a vested interest in doing is dividing Americans. So to the extent the Democrats are out there yelling at anyone that if you help Donald Trump, you're helping the Russians, that's what the Russians want. They don't want Donald Trump elected. They want the Democrats yelling at Republicans and Republicans yelling at Democrats. So we're so internally distracted, hating each other, we're distracted from what the Russians are actually doing. The Chinese are now helping the Russians build their weaponry in Ukraine. And the Chinese are increasingly giving the Russians weapons technology to test against us. Remember, this is one of the things we were doing with Ukraine. We were giving Ukraine older weapon systems, using the purchases to build more advanced weapon systems, and we were testing how our old weapon systems responded to the best of the Russians. And it turns out our old generation technology is actually superior to the bleeding edge Russian technology. And our bleeding edge technology is far more advanced than the Russian technology. So now the Chinese are doing the same thing in reverse. The Chinese are beginning to give increasingly their good technology to Russia so that the Russians can test it in Ukraine against our more cutting edge stuff to see how the Chinese systems fare. And it turns out, by the way, our systems still do very well against the Chinese. The problem for the Chinese is this: they are not battle tested. Every time the Chinese launch an innovative new weapon system, it fails. Their latest bleeding-edge nuclear aircraft carrier caught on fire and cracked in half. Their destroyers shut down at sea inexplicably, not through maliciousness, but through incompetent building. The Chinese nuclear missile arsenal was being filled up not with fuel, but with water. The head of the program was executed for it. Communist systems are less efficient than capitalist systems. The Chinese are now using the Russians to test weapon systems in Ukraine, and they're not going well. The problem is that we're thinking of escalating the situation. I'm all about helping Ukraine stop Russia, and I think we should give them more and better weapon systems. But I'm not so sure we want the Ukrainians using American missiles to bomb Russia. Putin is signaling that would mean war. The problem for us is that Putin says that'll mean war. Putin's already at war with us. Putin's already plotting sabotaging cables. They're already sabotaging communications array in Norway. They're already plotting around the country and the world. And I guarantee you we have sleeper cells in this country right now, Chinese and Russian sleeper cells, just waiting for an escalation. And I just hope Joe Biden and Keir Starmer don't decide to escalate the war. As much as I want to help the Ukrainians, I'm not interested in expanding a war footprint around the world. That, I think, would be foolish for us to do. And I'm a little bit concerned that that may be where they're headed. I'm also concerned about advancing conservative solutions in this country, and that's where Americans for Prosperity comes in. You can help them. You can join them at americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. AFP is the largest leading grassroots organization in the country, and they happen to be on our side. They go door to door. They have an army of volunteers. They go to state legislatures and local governments. They explain common sense conservative solutions. and they explain how to advance. They explain how to implement common sense conservative solutions to improve schools, to improve the lives of families, to help small businesses, to secure the border, to help you and me. You can be a part of it. You learn how to be a great, effective conservative activist with Americans for Prosperity. Go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer today. Sign up with them. They're a great organization. They'll make you really effective. They'll also make you the most informed member of your circle of friends. They give you the information and the tools to be able to advance the fight for conservatism. And if you really want to get involved in the 2024 election, they'll make you a very effective volunteer. Go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer today. americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. AFP is a great organization. I'm proud to partner with them. I'm doing some events for them around the country. More details on that coming soon, but sign up with them today. Become an effective conservative activist. americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson here, 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I'd be delighted to have you. Now, we got lots of other stuff we got to talk about today, but right now I need to tell you, Fani Willis here in Georgia has had a pretty significant setback in her case against Donald Trump. It's not going so well. The judge in Georgia has moved, thrown out more counts in the Trump election interference case. She also, by the way, says she's going to ignore a subpoena to testify before the Georgia legislature. Good luck with that. But Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee on Thursday struck 3 additional counts from the year-old indictment that alleged former President Donald Trump and more than a dozen others were involved in a felony conspiracy to overturn the election. McAfee concluded the criminal conduct described in the felony counts, which all involved alleged false statements made to a federal court, lie beyond the state's jurisdiction under the Supremacy Clause and must be removed. So the order affects only 2 of the 15 remaining defendants in the case, Attorney John Eastman and State Senator Sean Still. But the judge's findings would eventually apply to the other defendants charged of those counts, including Donald Trump, once the Georgia Court of Appeals lifts a stay impacting the bulk of the case. So the stay, so essentially the district attorney is not allowed to advance the case until a 3-judge panel has considered a request to remove Fani Willis, the district attorney, from the case. So the case has been frozen. There's no action to happen, but there are 32 felony counts in the indictment now. Donald Trump is facing 8 indictment counts. He was originally facing 13, but that drops to 8. This case continues to get worse and worse. All of these cases were presumed to be good cases for the Democrats. I've said all along this one was probably better than the D.C. one, but also not that strong of a case. The only thing Fani Willis has had going for her in Georgia is that Georgia has a very broad RICO statute. So she can take a bunch of different people who did a bunch of unrelated things, claim it's all related to a criminal enterprise, that is to overturn the election, and tie all those things together, and each person can be held responsible for the other person's actions. It's too unwieldy of a case to be prosecuted. And given the shenanigans of how they put it together through the special grand jury process, it's become weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, and it's going to bleed the taxpayers of Fulton County dry as she tries to advance this case. I don't think it's going to get anywhere, and I would not be surprised. I mean, it can go either way, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Georgia Court of Appeals tosses Willis from the case, just given so many of the allegations against her that have been substantiated in her behaviors in the run-up to this prosecution. We'll see. All right. Plenty more when we come back. We got to get into some of the political news of the day, including Democratic panic beginning to set in over the United States Senate. And also, I do want to talk a little bit about the Laura Loomer situation, because there are a couple of points that need to be made about the people Donald Trump surrounds himself with. I will tell you, if you subscribe to my Substack, you can text Eric to 33777 and get it. My piece this morning was my national syndicated column based on my monologue from yesterday, Dear Donald Trump. And it was advice to Donald Trump. And the basic point of the advice is if you don't stop hanging around with crazy people and focus a little bit more on your election, you're going to lose and you're going to go to jail. So you need to win this thing. I'll get into that and Laura Loomer when we come back.